do I put all the domains in one big computer? Do I want to, go from 100 plus ECUs to 10 ECUs to one ECU? Those are architectural questions,
Yeah.
and they all have implications,
Yeah.
both from a hardware standpoint and a software standpoint.
Green Hills Software is a worldwide leader in embedded safety and security, with hundreds of millions of vehicles running software created with Green Hills Automotive Solutions. Green Hills safety certified real-time environments, embedded virtualization, and advanced development tools lower development costs while reducing time to SOP. For the latest in software-defined vehicle solutions, visit www.ghs.com. NXP is where the future of automotive begins. Designed to scale and evolve, NXP's system platforms are the foundation for every vehicle architecture. We are innovative collaborators, propelling you forward to spark growth for a future that's dynamic, safe, intelligent, and electrified. Let's redefine automotive together. So Phil is actually the first guest of the Ojo-Yoshida Report, Dig Deeper on software-defined vehicle. And I'm going to pick his brain to see what exactly is software-defined vehicle, and we will look at the software-defined vehicle from different angles. And then we talk about that what is really driving OEMs to go towards this software-defined route. I mean, is that a matter of wanting to become a cool kiss, or there's a much deeper motivation in it. So let's start from here, Phil. So the SDV, you said that even your own company is actually doing this exercise in terms of what SDV is. Is that right?
It is. It is. What we're at right now is kind of a crossover point where primarily what S&P and other market intelligence firms have focused on was counting the physical parts. How many ECUs are in a car, how many processors and semiconductors are in ECUs. That was kind of our genesis. But we're finding more and more now that the questions that people are asking after they understand that stuff is what are the software implications? What's the how is software influencing the market, and especially as we transition from say L1 L2 autonomy up to L2 plus and more advanced autonomous systems, that software is becoming more and more of the driving force. So that's becoming a bigger part of it. And you know, on the one hand, the simple thing that we can do is measure it by saying, well, how much more memory do you need? Because even with software, there's a physical element to it. If you're going to put more
Right.
software in a car, you need more DRAM, you need more NAND.
Yeah.
But we're everybody's trying to look beyond that and trying to figure out the supply chain for software and how it influences the time to market timeline
Sure.
and all those things. So software is going from being, I remember when I was a young engineer where software was kind of the thing that you had in every system, but it was trying to patch some of the limitations of what you had in the hardware, where now it's kind of swung to the other direction where the software is almost unbounded in its capabilities, and it's somewhat limited by the hardware, so you still got this give and take between
Oh,
them,
that's
but the driving forces are becoming more software oriented than hardware oriented.
that's fascinating. Yeah. So actually, I want to actually start correcting my own understanding of software-defined vehicle 5 years ago. I used to think software-defined vehicle as, oh, this is all about over-the-air updates. That was my first thinking,
Sure.
and at the same time, I was thinking that, Well, not only that, it's like everybody talking about smartphones on the vehicle. So it's about apps on my information, entertainment
Right.
unit in the car. But that is not what we're talking about here, is it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, if you
Okay.
limited it to just OTA and apps and things like that, yeah, that's an element of SDV. I would say those are maybe necessary but not sufficient to really make an SDV system what I think of. I mean, kind of at its most abstract level, the point of SDV is essentially to try to decouple the hardware development from the software development. So I can, develop a hardware platform. Um, and automotive's been doing that for decades.
Right.
And they've got qualifications and they've got all the learnings that they've had to be able to assess the integrity and the quality of the hardware.
Hmm.
But hardware is expensive. You can't change that casually. Where automotive's never going to be consumer. Where every 6 months we're going to put a whole new hardware package together. So
Yeah.
you do the hardware, um, but you also want to have this other development path, which is software, that
Right.
in a sense the software never has to be done, whereas the hardware has to be fixed at some point to meet qualification requirements. The software, on the other hand, is a lot more plastic. It can constantly be changing,
Uh,
learning, improving. So the OTA comment that you brought up is
mhm.
appropriate in terms of I can add features, I can fix bugs, I can do things that offers the end consumer of the vehicle
Yeah.
capabilities without them having to go to dealerships. Up to a point. If you've got an ICE vehicle, you still got to go get the oil change. That's never going to be a software
Yeah,
feature.
that's not gonna change. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I think the other thing that's been intriguing for ages is for the OEMs. Okay, once I sell the car, once the
Yeah.
dealer sells the car to me, how can I how can I generate additional revenue streams from that? And the software defined vehicle provides an interesting way of augmenting that. So you can add features of, hey, when you bought the car in the middle of summer, I'm in Denver, so I'm in a place that gets cold.
Yeah.
If you bought the car in the middle of summer and you didn't think you needed heated seats, but now
Oh,
it's,
butt warming thing that you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. Now it's the middle of winter, and you know what? I do
Yeah.
think I need heated seats. That in a hardware defined world, it would be I got to make that choice once when I bought the car. I never get to revisit it. In a software defined world, you can build the capabilities in, and then
Yeah.
later in the life cycle of the vehicle, somebody can make a decision that says, you know what, I want that now, and
Yeah.
another revenue
Yeah.
stream comes out of it. You've got entertainment possibilities for downloading movies or gaming now.
Yeah.
All of those things are software oriented, because if you think of those apps on your phone,
Yeah.
those change pretty regularly. If
Yeah,
if you
it
had to
does.
if you had to
Yeah.
fix those once when you bought your car and then said never again over the life of that vehicle, it would get stale pretty quickly.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But that story about the OEMs wanting a new wanting to generate new revenue stream, I think it's just my gut feeling is that
Mhm.
as a consumers, I don't want to subscribe to yet another, every month I get Junko, if you become a subscriber to car company X,
Yeah.
and then you get the constant update of the new features and new applications. I don't think I would go for that.
Yeah, I can tell you, personally, when at 3 a.m. when my cable box every day gets a refresh,
Yeah.
whenever I see that, my first reaction is not, "Oh, this is awesome. This is going to allow me to do things I couldn't do yesterday." It's like, It's just another annoyance to go through, or every time I get an update on my phone saying fixed bugs, it's like, okay, good.
Yeah.
Wish you would have fixed them before you downloaded the previous version. And I think with cars, there's going to be a little
Yeah.
bit of that
Yeah.
so much of that can happen in the background that you as the end
You would know.
consumer,
Yeah.
you'll never
Yeah.
know is happening.
That's true. That's true. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the more of a engineering side inside the car companies, the motivation for software-defined vehicle. I mean, so on the one hand, that there's certain things that the software-defined vehicle can please consumers or surprise consumers, but at the same time, software-defined vehicles could be useful for engineers who are kind of under pressure to reduce the number of the boxes inside, ECU
Yeah.
inside the car. Is it not? Isn't that the one of the reasons why they want to go for the software defined vehicle?
Well, I won't disagree with that. I think nobody's trying to figure out how to put more boxes on a car. Um, but I think, and this might be splitting a really fine hair, that, well, is that a result of the software defined vehicle, or is that a result of these more and more powerful SoCs coming out that can meet automotive expectations? Because the point of centralization is you've got to have a computing platform that's powerful enough to bring to consolidate all those disparate
Yeah,
ECUs into one box.
yeah,
Um, but having said that, once you've got that processing capabilities, then it's all about software. So, chicken and egg. It kind of
yeah,
feels like, um, for the longest time, we were trying to find SoCs that had enough that the SoC compute capability was kind of the ceiling that everybody was running into. I think we've busted through that ceiling now, and if the hardware is not going to limit you like that, then it gives you much more of a free reign to try to figure out what all do I do with the software. Do I put all the domains in one big computer? Do I want to, go from 100 plus ECUs to 10 ECUs to one ECU? Those are architectural questions,
yeah,
and they all have implications,
yeah,
uh, both from a hardware standpoint and a software standpoint. I think the software-defined vehicle, though, was the personal opinion. I think the motivation behind that was much more, um, time to market oriented, and additional services that you could add to
mm,
the consumer than it was architectural based. But once you got the architectural stuff solved with the processing, then you just saw
yeah,
that, oh my God, with the software defined vehicle, and then add to that AI. Suddenly, I now have a real bona fide compute platform that can do all sorts of things that I can imagine today,
yeah,
and maybe hope that I can imagine what its needs are going to be in the future.
yeah. That's an important point because how many ECUs do we have now,
Oh,
Phil?
I think we've counted over 120, maybe up to 150, depending on the feature content of a car. A lot.
Right,
And the
a lot.
manufacturing of a
And
car under those circumstances is significant.
so there are, architecturally speaking, there are domain controllers, there are zonal controllers in the central computing. We see all those block diagrams in the past. But what made me realize, though, is that the OEM is not going to go from one point A to point C right away. I mean, it's
No.
like there's a lot of different variations of the, even zonal. It's like some parts are domain, some parts are zonal, some parts are, doing something different, right? So that complexity, if I'm an engineer, although I'm not an engineer, but if I'm a design engineer or vehicle, that will drive me nuts because it's not just my branded vehicle. I have from high end to low end. Then I have to redesign not only the hardware, But because I'm going to combine some ECUs together, then what happens to the software that I actually use for
Hmm.
individual ECUs? How do you combine them? Isn't that I thought that that would be good reason if I'm an engineer that would like to get the software defined vehicle.
Well, and I think of you know the along those same lines. It's back to you kind of separate the hardware development from the software development in that you work the hardware development based on what's available at the time. And then the software development is what's available at the time, and then where can additional software developments go over the life of the vehicle.
Yeah,
The architectural stuff, I think, is interesting, is going to be an interesting case study for everybody in grad school, if not now, in the near future. Um, because that presents different challenges to different OEMs. I mean, if you're a traditional OEM and you're supporting ICE vehicles and hybrid powertrains and BEVs, and you want to have a unified strategy, you got to have some hardware commonality. You certainly want to have software commonality. If you're a new EV supplier and you don't have to deal with that legacy, you can come at that from a very different perspective. And I think it's fascinating when you had mentioned earlier when you first started thinking about software defined vehicles, it was,
yeah,
I remember it was, what's the killer app going to be? What's the killer app that's going to be on your car? That was as advanced as we had started with
yeah,
in what came to
we,
be known as a software defined vehicle.
yeah,
Now the software defined vehicles, not just infotainment and ADAS, you're talking about how do I measure and monitor and charge the individual battery cells on
yeah.
a BEV. That's becoming more of a software activity. um,
Interesting,
so
right?
the software kind of started in infotainment, then bled into ADAS. It really is unbounded. It's going to touch all the applications in the
Yeah,
car. So that engineer that you were talking about,
yeah,
has to see, it's exciting. It's also challenging because
yeah,
when we talk about future proofing things, and the software defined vehicle is one element of how do I future proof a
yeah,
vehicle. You kind of have to have a sense of where is the future of this vehicle going, or of vehicles going, and
yeah,
how do I put the things in without making these cars too expensive for people to buy them in the first case, so that they can
yeah.
eventually add features to them in the future.
No, I think you raised a very interesting point because now what you just said, it just reminds me this is why the Chinese OEMs focus on EVs and they're like, they got this whole green field things going on
Yep.
and that they can pick the platform they want and they can pick the software they want. I mean, it's like a lot easier actually to maneuver the conventional, traditional OEMs, right?
And I think there's two elements to that.
Yeah,
You just hit on one of them, that I just have to support one powertrain architecture instead of
yeah,
a whole bunch of powertrain architectures.
yeah.
The other things is putting organizations together. I mean, we talk about this. We don't know what to do with it, but we talk about, that one of the challenges, if you take the software defined vehicle kind of out to the limit, you're going to centralize everything in one big central computer that's doing all the systems on the vehicle. It's like, okay, but what OEM is organized that way? OEMs traditionally are organized, there's a powertrain group, there's a chassis group, there's a entertainment
Oh,
group. So one of the challenges of the software defined vehicle is technical. Part of it is organizational and cultural. Is how do you break down those existing organizational structures to make those different groups work much more cooperatively than they have together. Whereas if you're starting from scratch, you don't have to build those different silos. You'll
yeah,
build a different silo. I don't know what it's going to be
yeah,
called, but
yeah,
you're always building silos. It's just what those
yeah,
silos are
yeah.
containing, and what are they excluding.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So that's really the more of a human side of
Oh yeah.
the design engineering issues. I can totally see that. But what about the implication for supply chain
Mm.
when the software defined vehicle becomes mainstream? Um, it's I don't really subscribe to this idea, but it's kind of interesting. For the last 10 years or 5 years, I keep hearing the silicon guys, because I talk to semiconductor
Oh yeah.
companies all the time. They always want to tell me that, no, Junko, we're talking to directly to OEMs, as though that's a badge of honor, right? And so that you're sort of like moving the tier ones out of the picture. And what do you see? Actually, you've been close to the automotive industry. Tell me about how the dynamics, the relationship between OEMs, tier ones, chip guys, and software guys. How is it changing?
Well, it's always evolving. I mean, to your point about the silicon guys, I remember when I worked for semiconductor companies, the goal was how do I go around the tier ones and deal directly with the OEMs? Because the OEMs, if I can influence the decision at the OEM, that gives me more leverage than if I have to influence the decision at every one of the tier ones. So
Oh,
it's there's a tactical advantage, there's a strategic advantage, there's definitely a badge of honor of, hey, I'm dealing directly with the OEMs.
yeah.
Um, but I think the supply chain in general, the software defined vehicle is not going to simplify that. It's going to change it, because what we've been seeing now for the past many years, and I don't think there's anything insightful in this, is we've gone from the very hierarchical structure with the OEM up at top, talking to the tier ones, talking to the rest of the suppliers. Well, that's kind of fallen away, and it's much more of a everybody's dealing directly with everybody else. So,
Oh,
the OEMs are dealing directly with software suppliers, are dealing directly with the SoC suppliers, are dealing directly with the tier ones, and whoever comes up with an idea of a good technical or commercial idea, they then they're in the driver's seat in a sense. And right now the SoC guys are the ones that are kind of in the driver's seat, because as I'd mentioned earlier, we were somewhat limited in terms of SoC performance. Well, SoC performance has just taken off, so a lot of those limitations have gone away. So
yeah.
the SoC guys are the ones right now that are kind of steering the ship.
Right.
But I know we had a conversation with a software company not too long ago, and they were saying that it wasn't that many years ago where they would go in as a software supplier and essentially say, "This is what I need for you to implement my software stack on your vehicle," and the
Hmm.
OEMs would say, "Thank you very much. We will buy that and we'll proceed." And now it's much more of a two-way conversation of, well, here's our software. Okay, well, what resources do you need? How much compute do you need? What's your cost? What are the other uh, practical
Oh,
considerations? And they're now becoming those conversations now start sounding to me very much like they are with the SoC guys, where when they didn't have enough, or when the OEMs didn't think they had enough compute, they weren't talking about cost or power dissipation. They were just, I need more compute. Now that they have enough compute, they're talking about the other practical things. Same things happening on the software side, where we're getting to the point where it's becoming known enough that the OEMs are pushing back a little on the supply chain. These are your
hmm.
constraints. You have to fit within it. And then the other big thing is the OEMs are looking as to how much more of that software generation do I bring in house, versus
Oh,
buying it from somebody else in the supply chain. What do I create? And
right.
that's a really, to me, that's a really big question.
Yeah, that no, that's a whole new dynamics. I mean, I kind of like the idea. It's like it's not no longer structured. OEM at the top, king of the hill,
Right.
but it's more like everybody's kind of chiming in on each other, and whoever has the best idea will get win. But let me ask you this:
Sure.
given that, still, tier ones are in a hard place, no?
They are in a challenging place, but
Yeah.
it's easy from an outsider's perspective to see the challenges of the tier one, because you've got, the OEMs are trying to work their way down. They want to write more and more of the code, and you've got the SoC suppliers that are trying to work their way up in the relationship, where they also want to write more and more of the code. And the tier ones are in that middle spot of being squeezed both by the semiconductor side and by the OEM side.
Right.
But there is value the tier ones bring. And I don't see the tier ones, turning into just contract manufacturers. I think they've got a lot of expertise. Many of them have been around as long as some of these OEMs have been around. They know the automotive industry, and times where the OEMs have tried to essentially squeeze the tier ones out in favor of just using contract manufacturers. I think in
Mhm.
more cases than not, they may do that for a generation or two of a product, and then they're back dealing with the tier ones directly, saying, "Hey, we realize there's some value that you bring. We don't want
Yeah.
to pay for it, but we realize there's some value that you bring." I think the software-defined vehicle is is going to be both a challenge and an opportunity
Opportunity.
for the tier ones, because still we're all trying to wrestle who's going to be writing what code,
Yeah.
and there's arguments for who should be writing the code.
Yeah.
Um, but I
Yeah.
don't know that there's anybody in that supply chain that thinks any one part of the supply
I
chain should be
see.
writing the entire code for the vehicle, because you either understand one element really well at the expense of other elements, or
Yeah.
vice versa. But it's hard to know everything from how the silicon works all the way up
Oh,
to how a car
wow.
works.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, when you think about it, that it gets even more complicated because if you make changes in one piece of software in a vehicle, it's not just if it is just one ECU, that's okay. You can replace the ECU, but if that piece of software has a sort of unintended
Oh,
consequences for the rest of the vehicle, who is going to be responsible for
I,
that, right?
I,
Yeah,
I still envision cases where, you put together everybody in one room that was responsible for making that car work.
yeah,
And it's going to be a big room full of people. And there's not going to be that one person that gets to say,
yeah.
"I know everything. I know how all the links are connected." It's going to be, "I know how some of the links are connected, but these are becoming bigger. Just the lines of code. I mean,
Yeah,
who's going to know all of that?" Um,
yeah.
you know, it,
That's a good question.
it's
Yeah.
the ownership of these systems are going to become more and more distributed,
Yeah.
which is going to complicate the relationships, but
Yeah.
it's going to change the relationships. And I don't know what the end solution looks like, because I've been around automotive long enough to have seen when the OEMs wanted to have silicon in-house. They designed
Yeah.
silicon, they manufactured silicon. That fell out of favor. They got rid of all that stuff, and now you hear people talking about, well, what's the key to Tesla's success? Well, you know what? They've got everything in-house. We've seen it before. We know how these things
Yeah.
run their course.
Yeah.
It's getting the timing right, and
Yeah.
when do you want to be responsible for everything, and when do you want to start jettisoning some of those responsibilities?
Yeah. No, that's and then that let's not forget chiplets are coming.
Well,
So
and then yeah, just that'll
that's a
simplify
separate
everything.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Very good. So, is there any particular things that you think that software-defined vehicle? I mean, I think we covered a lot of grounds, and one of the things I actually also want to touch upon is that is software-defined vehicle is critical for the future cybersecurity for the vehicle.
Well, I don't know if I would say it's critical for cybersecurity, but it's critical the cars are secure against cyber attacks. And
Yeah.
hardware and software both have a role to play in that. That is a whole nother topic of conversation.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. You cannot be doing all this stuff. You can't be enabling over-the-air updates and
Yeah.
very intense processing on vehicle without ensuring that it is secure, both as the vehicle is being produced, but then once it's out on the road, that it's not subject to attacks. Because you know as much as we all like, yeah, maybe we don't like it, as much as we all hear that, oh, a car is just a really big cell phone, which by the way it's not.
It's
um,
not.
at the end of the day, it does things different. Its interaction with people in the real world is different than any other systems that are out there. So they
Yeah.
cannot lose control of their ability to uh, be safe, be secure, because otherwise people get hurt.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's true. All right. Very good, Phil. I will have you come back maybe at the closing of this whole series so that we can actually compare notes and say what we
Okay.
learned.
Once you figured this all out, you can come back and educate me.
All right. Thanks for coming to the
Oh, it's
show,
my pleasure. It's
and
always good talking to
we'll
you,
stay in
Junko.
touch.
All
Okay.
right. Take care. Bye
Bye.
now.
NXP is where the future of automotive begins. Designed to scale and evolve, NXP's system platforms are the foundation for every vehicle architecture. We are innovative collaborators, propelling you forward to spark growth for a future that's dynamic, safe, intelligent, and electrified. Let's redefine automotive together. Green Hills Software is a worldwide leader in embedded safety and security with hundreds of millions of vehicles running software created with Green Hills Automotive Solutions. Green Hills safety certified real-time environments, embedded virtualization, and advanced development tools lower development costs while reducing time to SOP. For the latest in software-defined vehicle solutions, visit www.ghs.com.